The Pacific Northwest rain drummed against the windows of the Seattle Times newsroom as investigative journalist Rachel Morrison packed her camera equipment for what would become the most important and final assignment of her conventional life. It was Thursday, March 7, 2016, and the gray March sky hung over Seattle like a shroud, fitting for a story that would take Rachel into the shadows of religious extremism and ultimately beyond the boundaries of ordinary reality. Rachel was 34 years old and had spent the last 8 years building a reputation as one of the most fearless investigative journalists on the West Coast. She specialized in exposing corruption, cults, and fringe religious movements that preyed on vulnerable people. Her tall, athletic frame and shoulder-length auburn hair made her instantly recognizable around Seattle, but it was her piercing green eyes and relentless pursuit of truth that had earned her 3 Polk Awards and the respect of colleagues across the industry. She lived alone in a converted loft in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, surrounded by the tools of her trade: cameras, recording equipment, stacks of research files, and walls covered with photos and documents from her investigations. Her personal life had suffered from her professional dedication. Her marriage to fellow journalist David Chen had ended 2 years earlier when her obsession with dangerous stories became too much for their relationship to bear. The story that had captured Rachel's attention involved a religious group called the Eternal Dawn Community that had established a compound in the remote forests of the Olympic Peninsula, about 2 hours west of Seattle. The group was led by a charismatic figure known only as Father Gabriel, who claimed to offer his followers a path to spiritual transcendence through what he called dimensional awakening. Rachel had been investigating the group for 6 months after receiving a desperate letter from Margaret Collins, a mother in Tacoma whose 22-year-old daughter Emma had joined the community and subsequently cut off all contact with her family. The letter described Emma as having been a normal college student studying environmental science at the University of Washington before she encountered the group's recruiters at a sustainability fair on campus. According to Margaret's account, Emma had been drawn in by the group's message about humanity's need to evolve beyond current limitations and connect with higher planes of consciousness. The recruitment had been gradual, first attending lectures about spiritual ecology, then weekend retreats, and finally the decision to join the community permanently, donating her college fund and severing ties with her family. Rachel's initial research into the Eternal Dawn community revealed a disturbing pattern. The group had been founded 5 years earlier by a man named Gabriel Thornfield, a former psychology professor who had been dismissed from Eastern Washington University for conducting unauthorized experiments on students involving sensory deprivation and hallucinogenic substances. After his dismissal, Thornfield had disappeared for 2 years before emerging with his new identity as Father Gabriel and a message about humanity's need for conscious evolution. The community's compound, located on 200 acres of dense forest near the town of Forks, was described by former members who had contacted Rachel as a place where reality itself seemed to operate according to different rules. These whistleblowers spoke of members experiencing shared visions, apparent telepathic communication, and what Gabriel called dimensional slips, moments when individuals would briefly disappear from the physical plane and return with knowledge of other realities. Dr. Susan Martinez, a cult specialist and deprogrammer who had worked with several former members of similar groups, warned Rachel about the particular dangers of investigating the Eternal Dawn community. According to Dr. Martinez, Gabriel Thornfield had apparently developed techniques that went far beyond typical cult brainwashing, methods that seemed to actually alter participants' perception of reality in ways that conventional psychology couldn't explain. "I've worked with survivors from dozens of cults and extreme religious groups," Dr. Martinez explained during Rachel's interview with her. "But the people who've left Eternal Dawn describe experiences that challenge everything we think we know about consciousness and reality." Several of them maintain that they developed genuine psychic abilities while in the group, and some continue to experience what they call dimensional bleeding, moments when they perceive multiple realities simultaneously. Rachel's editor at the Seattle Times, James Patterson, had initially been skeptical about the story's newsworthiness. Cults and fringe religious groups were common in the Pacific Northwest, and most of them eventually collapsed on their own or were shut down by authorities for financial crimes. But as Rachel's investigation deepened and she uncovered evidence of possible connections between Eternal Dawn and several other unexplained disappearances in the region, Patterson gave her approval for a major investigative series. The breakthrough in Rachel's investigation came when she made contact with David Reeves, a former member of Eternal Dawn who had escaped from the compound 6 months earlier. David, a 30-year-old former software engineer from Portland, had joined the group after a devastating divorce and had spent 2 years living on the compound before managing to leave. David's account of life inside Eternal Dawn was unlike anything Rachel had encountered in her previous cult investigations. According to him, Gabriel didn't rely primarily on isolation and psychological manipulation to control his followers. Instead, he used a combination of meditation techniques, sensory deprivation, and exposure to what he claimed were consciousness-expanding energy fields naturally present in the forest where the compound was located. Gabriel convinced us that the land itself was special, David explained during a clandestine meeting with Rachel at a coffee shop in Olympia. He said the area had been used by Native American tribes for vision quests for thousands of years, and that the geological formations there created natural conditions for accessing other dimensions. The scary thing is, after being there for a while, I started to believe him because weird things really did happen. David described experiences that sounded like science fiction. Group meditations where all participants would share the same vivid visions, moments when the physical laws seemed to bend around Gabriel's presence, and ritualistic ceremonies where members would apparently disappear for hours at a time and return with no memory of where they had been. Most disturbing was David's account of what Gabriel called the Great Work, an ultimate goal of the community that involved opening permanent portals between dimensions and enabling humanity to transcend physical existence entirely. According to David, Gabriel claimed that certain individuals were chosen vessels who could serve as anchors for these dimensional portals, allowing others to follow them into higher planes of reality. Gabriel kept talking about finding the right person to serve as the first pioneer, someone with the perfect combination of spiritual openness and journalistic integrity, who could document the transition and serve as a bridge between our world and the next. David told Rachel. He was very specific that it needed to be someone whose disappearance would be noticed and investigated, someone whose testimony would be believed when they communicated from the other side. This detail sent chills down Rachel's spine, but also confirmed her determination to expose the group before they could harm more people. She began planning an undercover infiltration of the compound, using her identity as a freelance spiritual journalist, interested in alternative communities as her cover story. On March 7th, Rachel drove her Honda Civic west from Seattle toward the Olympic Peninsula, carrying her professional camera equipment concealed within what appeared to be camping gear. Her plan was to approach the compound as a writer researching intentional communities for a book about sustainable living alternatives. She had prepared a detailed backstory and fake credentials that would hold up under casual scrutiny. Rachel's last confirmed contact with the outside world came at 2:30 p.m., when she stopped for gas in Port Angeles and sent a text message to her editor. Approaching target location. We'll check in tomorrow evening with initial report. The message was sent from her personal cell phone, which would later be found abandoned in the Port Angeles gas station parking lot. Security cameras at the gas station showed Rachel filling up her car and purchasing supplies that were consistent with her cover story: organic food, camping equipment, and books about sustainable living. She appeared calm and focused, showing no signs of distress or awareness that she was walking into danger. The next confirmed sighting of Rachel came from a clerk at a general store in Forks, about 30 miles from the suspected location of the Eternal Dawn compound. Store owner Bill Henderson later told investigators that a woman matching Rachel's description had stopped in around 4 p.m., purchasing additional camping supplies and asking for directions to spiritual communities in the area. According to Henderson, Rachel seemed interested but cautious when he mentioned that there were some unusual folks living up in the forest, and suggested she might want to be careful about approaching unfamiliar groups alone. Henderson remembered thinking that Rachel seemed too city sophisticated for serious wilderness camping, but he respected her determination and gave her general directions to several known intentional communities in the region. That was the last time anyone from the conventional world saw Rachel Morrison alive. When Rachel failed to check in with her editor the following evening, James Patterson initially wasn't alarmed. Rachel was known for extending her investigations when she discovered promising leads, and communication in the remote forest areas could be unreliable. But when a second day passed without contact, Patterson called the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department to report a missing journalist. Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in missing persons cases in the Olympic Peninsula region, took over the investigation. Detective Santos had 15 years of experience dealing with people who disappeared in the vast wilderness areas of western Washington, and she knew that the first 48 hours were crucial for finding missing persons alive. The search began with Rachel's known route and expanded outward from there. Her car was found abandoned on a Forest Service road about 10 miles from Forks, parked legally but showing no signs of disturbance. The vehicle was unlocked with Rachel's purse and backup camera equipment still inside, but her primary camera and recording equipment were missing. Search and rescue teams from 3 counties converged on the area, using tracking dogs, helicopters, and hundreds of volunteers to comb through the dense forest. The search was complicated by the terrain. Old-growth forest with thick undergrowth, steep ravines, and numerous seasonal streams that could conceal evidence or carry it far from its original location. After 5 days of intensive searching, teams found what appeared to be a makeshift campsite about 2 miles from where Rachel's car was discovered. The site contained evidence of recent occupation, a fire ring, disturbed vegetation, and food packaging consistent with the supplies Rachel had purchased. However, there were no clear signs of struggle or distress. More puzzling was the discovery of several photographs scattered around the campsite. The photos appeared to have been taken with professional equipment and showed images of the forest that were both beautiful and somehow unsettling. The composition and lighting were expert, clearly Rachel's work, but the subject matter was strange. Trees and rocks arranged in patterns that seemed too symmetrical to be natural, and shadows that fell in directions that didn't match the position of the sun. Detective Santos consulted with local Native American tribal authorities about the area where Rachel had been camping. Tribal elder Joseph Running Bear of the Quinault Nation confirmed that the location was considered sacred ground, traditionally used for vision quests and spiritual ceremonies. According to tribal oral history, the area was also considered dangerous for those who weren't properly prepared, as it was believed to be a place where the boundary between worlds was thin. "Your missing woman chose a powerful place to camp," Running Bear told Detective Santos. "The old ones used to say that certain people are called to such places when it's time for them to cross over to the next phase of existence. Sometimes the crossing is physical death, but sometimes it's something else, a transformation that takes them beyond what most people understand as life." The first major break in the case came 3 weeks after Rachel's disappearance, when David Reeves, the former Eternal Dawn member who had been Rachel's primary source, contacted Detective Santos with crucial information. David revealed that he had been in secret communication with Rachel about the timing of her infiltration attempt, and that she had been specifically investigating the group's claims about dimensional portals. According to David, Rachel had been particularly interested in what the group called the Observatory, a natural clearing deep in the forest where Gabriel conducted his most advanced ceremonies. The location was said to be where the community's most devoted members went to attempt dimensional crossing, and several people had reportedly disappeared during these rituals, though their disappearances had been explained as successful transitions to higher planes of existence. David provided Detective Santos with rough directions to the observatory, based on his memories from his time in the community. The location was approximately 5 miles deeper into the forest from where Rachel's campsite had been found, accessible only by unmarked trails that required expert navigation skills to follow. A specialized search team was organized to locate the observatory, including experienced wilderness guides, search and rescue personnel, and FBI agents who had been called in due to the suspected cult involvement. The team also included Dr. Martinez, the cult specialist who hoped to provide insight into the psychological aspects of whatever they might discover. The search team found the observatory after 2 days of difficult hiking through terrain that seemed to defy normal forest ecology. The clearing was perfectly circular, surrounded by old-growth trees that formed an almost cathedral-like canopy overhead. In the center of the clearing was a natural amphitheater formed by unusual rock formations that created remarkable acoustic properties. What the search team discovered in the observatory would challenge everything they thought they knew about Rachel's disappearance and the nature of the Eternal Dawn community itself. The clearing showed evidence of extensive recent use: fire rings, meditation areas, and what appeared to be sleeping quarters for a large group of people. But there were no people present, and the site had an abandoned quality that suggested it hadn't been occupied for weeks. More mysteriously, the team found extensive evidence of Rachel's presence at the site. Her professional equipment was arranged in a careful display around the central rock formation: tripods, lenses, and lighting equipment positioned as if for an elaborate photo shoot. But there was no sign of Rachel herself, and her primary camera was missing from the equipment array. Dr. Martinez noted that the arrangement of equipment looked ritualistic rather than practical, as if it had been placed there for ceremonial purposes rather than for actual photography. The positioning of the equipment also seemed to focus attention on the central rock formation, which had unusual magnetic properties that caused compasses to malfunction and electronic equipment to operate erratically. FBI Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, who led the federal investigation into the cult aspects of the case, ordered a comprehensive search of the entire Olympic Peninsula for any trace of the Eternal Dawn community. What they discovered was that the group had apparently vanished completely around the same time as Rachel's disappearance. The community's compound, when finally located and searched, was found completely abandoned, but in perfect order. Buildings were clean and maintained, food supplies were organized, and personal belongings were arranged neatly in dormitory-style rooms. It appeared that the entire community of approximately 40 people had simply walked away from their lives simultaneously, leaving no note or explanation. Among the materials found at the compound were extensive journals and documents detailing Gabriel Thornfield's theories about dimensional transcendence and the role of consciousness in accessing alternate realities. The writings combined elements of quantum physics, Native American spirituality, and psychological techniques in ways that were both scientifically sophisticated and deeply unsettling. One document that particularly caught Agent Walsh's attention was titled The Pioneer Protocol, and described a detailed plan for using a bridge consciousness to establish permanent communication between dimensions. According to the document, the ideal pioneer would be someone with exceptional observational skills, credibility in the conventional world, and the courage to document their experiences even under extraordinary circumstances. The document's description of the ideal pioneer matched Rachel's professional qualifications perfectly, suggesting that her involvement with the group hadn't been accidental. Gabriel had apparently identified Rachel as a potential candidate for his dimensional crossing experiment and had somehow arranged for her to discover and investigate the community. As the first-year anniversary of Rachel's disappearance approached, the official investigation was gradually scaled back. Despite extensive searches, interviews with hundreds of people, and analysis of all available evidence, authorities had found no definitive proof of what had happened to Rachel or to the members of the Eternal Dawn community. Margaret Collins, the mother whose letter had started Rachel's investigation, established a foundation dedicated to finding missing persons who had disappeared while investigating cults and fringe religious groups. The foundation offered support to families while also continuing the search for answers about their loved ones' fates. James Patterson, Rachel's editor, never assigned another journalist to complete her investigation. He maintained her desk at the Seattle Times exactly as she had left it, treating it as a memorial to a colleague who had paid the ultimate price for pursuing the truth. Several other journalists expressed interest in following up on Rachel's work, but Patterson felt that the story was too dangerous to pursue further. Dr. Martinez continued studying the materials found at the Eternal Dawn compound and gradually developed a theory about what might have happened to Rachel and the community members. According to her analysis, Gabriel had developed techniques for inducing group hallucinations so powerful that participants genuinely believed they were experiencing alternate realities. The human mind is capable of creating experiences that feel completely real even when they contradict physical evidence, Dr. Martinez explained in her report. If Gabriel succeeded in convincing his followers that dimensional crossing was possible, they might have participated in a mass suicide believing they were transcending to a higher plane of existence. However, this theory was complicated by the fact that no bodies were ever found, despite extensive searches of the compound and surrounding forest. The complete absence of physical remains suggested either that the group had staged their disappearance and relocated elsewhere, or that something genuinely extraordinary had occurred. In the third year after Rachel's disappearance, several hikers and campers in the Olympic Peninsula began reporting unusual encounters that seemed connected to the missing journalist. These reports described meeting a woman matching Rachel's description in remote forest areas, always carrying professional camera equipment, and documenting natural phenomena with scientific precision. Tom Bradley, an experienced wilderness photographer from Portland, reported an encounter that would be repeated by other visitors to the area over the following years. While camping near the observatory, Bradley was awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of camera equipment being operated nearby. When he investigated, he found a woman who matched published descriptions of Rachel Morrison, photographing the rock formations under starlight. According to Bradley, the woman noticed his approach and smiled in recognition, as if she had been expecting him. When he asked if she was Rachel Morrison, she nodded and said, "I'm documenting the crossing points. People need to understand that the boundaries aren't as fixed as they believe." Bradley tried to engage her in further conversation and ask about her disappearance, but Rachel gestured toward the sky and said, "Time works differently here. What you call 8 years has been both an instant and an eternity for me. I'm exactly where I need to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do." When Bradley looked up to see what Rachel was indicating, he observed unusual aurora-like lights in the sky that shouldn't have been visible at that latitude. When he looked back down, Rachel had vanished, leaving only the faint scent of developing chemicals in the air. Similar encounters were reported by dozens of people over the following years, always in the remote wilderness areas of the Olympic Peninsula, and always involving Rachel, documenting natural phenomena with her cameras. Witnesses consistently described her as appearing calm, purposeful, and somehow more vibrant than an ordinary person, as if she were lit from within by some form of energy. Dr. Amanda Chen, a physicist from the University of Washington, who became interested in the reports of unusual phenomena in the Olympic Peninsula, organized scientific expeditions to study the electromagnetic and geological properties of areas where Rachel sightings were most commonly reported. Dr. Chen's research team discovered that many of these locations exhibited unusual magnetic field variations and electromagnetic anomalies that couldn't be explained by known geological processes. The rock formations at the observatory, in particular, showed properties that suggested they might be composed of materials not typically found in the Pacific Northwest. What we're observing is consistent with theoretical models of naturally occurring dimensional interfaces, Dr. Chen explained in her preliminary report. If such interfaces exist, they might allow consciousness to operate across multiple reality layers simultaneously, which could explain both Rachel's disappearance and the continued sightings of her in the area. In the 5th year after her disappearance, Rachel's case attracted the attention of Dr. Sarah Blackwood, a consciousness researcher from the Institute of Noetic Sciences, who had been studying reports of individuals who seemed to exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Blackwood organized a comprehensive study of the observatory and its effects on human consciousness, using volunteers who were experienced meditators and consciousness explorers. Dr. Blackwood's team conducted carefully monitored experiments at the observatory to document any unusual effects the location might have on human awareness. Several participants reported experiencing vivid visions of Rachel Morrison, documenting their sessions with cameras that seemed to exist in a slightly different dimensional layer. One participant, meditation teacher Lisa Chang, reported a particularly detailed encounter with Rachel during a consciousness expansion session at the observatory. According to Lisa, Rachel appeared as a translucent figure and communicated through a combination of telepathy and direct awareness transfer, rather than spoken words. "Rachel showed me that her disappearance wasn't a tragedy, but a graduation," Lisa explained. She had accepted a role as a dimensional documenter using her journalistic skills to record the interactions between different layers of reality. Her job is to gather evidence that consciousness isn't limited to single timeline or single dimension. The information Lisa received during her encounter included detailed explanations of how consciousness could exist across multiple realities simultaneously, and how certain individuals were called to serve as bridges between dimensional layers. According to this communication, Rachel's work as a dimensional journalist was crucial for humanity's eventual understanding of the true nature of reality. In the 7th year, Dr. Blackwood's research team made a breakthrough discovery that would change everything they thought they knew about Rachel's fate. While conducting deep meditation sessions at the observatory, several participants reported receiving specific instructions from Rachel about a location where they would find proof of the continuation. Following these psychically received directions, the research team located a site approximately 1 mile from the observatory, where the ground showed signs of having been deliberately disturbed. Using ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation techniques, they discovered a cache buried about 3 feet underground. The cache contained items that had clearly belonged to Rachel: personal effects, research notes, and most importantly, her primary camera equipment carefully wrapped in waterproof materials. The camera itself was a professional-grade digital SLR that appeared to be in perfect working condition despite having been buried for years. When Dr. Blackwood's team examined the camera's memory cards, They discovered hundreds of photographs that would revolutionize understanding of what had happened to Rachel Morrison. The images showed the same forest locations where Rachel had been last seen, but captured from perspectives and in lighting conditions that seemed to defy physical laws. Many of the photographs showed multiple exposure effects that revealed different time periods existing simultaneously in the same location. Ancient Native American ceremonies were overlaid with modern hiking activities. Old-growth forest coexisted with cleared logging areas from different decades, and seasonal changes appeared to occur within single images. Most remarkably, several photographs showed Rachel herself in the process of taking the pictures, apparently photographing herself from outside her own body, or from a perspective that existed in a different dimensional layer. These images suggested that Rachel had developed the ability to exist and operate across multiple reality streams simultaneously. The final series of photographs on the camera contained images that were clearly taken after Rachel's official disappearance, showing her documenting the search efforts for her own missing person case. These photographs captured search and rescue teams, police investigations, and even some of the memorial services held in her honor, all taken from impossible vantage points and showing details that hadn't been publicly reported. Among these post-disappearance photographs was a series of images showing the other members of the Eternal Dawn community existing in the same dimensional state as Rachel. The images revealed that the entire group had successfully achieved their goal of transcending physical existence while maintaining their ability to interact with and document the conventional world. Gabriel Thornfield appeared in several of the photographs, but transformed from the middle-aged psychology professor into something that seemed more like a guardian spirit of the forest. His image showed him leading the community members in their new roles as interdimensional observers and protectors of the natural world. The discovery of Rachel's camera and its impossible contents was reported to authorities, but the implications of the evidence were too extraordinary for official acceptance. Detective Santos, who had never given up on solving Rachel's case, examined the photographs with expert analysis and confirmed that they hadn't been digitally manipulated, but she struggled to explain how they could exist. FBI agent Walsh classified the camera evidence as part of the ongoing investigation, but privately acknowledged that the case had moved beyond conventional law enforcement capabilities. The evidence suggested that Rachel Morrison hadn't been killed or kidnapped, but had voluntarily participated in some form of consciousness evolution that allowed her to continue her journalistic work across multiple dimensional layers. Margaret Collins, whose letter had started Rachel's investigation, found peace in the discovery of the camera evidence. The photographs provided proof that her daughter Emma was safe and happy in her transformed state, existing as part of a community that had achieved a form of transcendence that conventional understanding couldn't explain. James Patterson, Rachel's editor, finally felt comfortable completing her story based on the evidence from the camera. He published a comprehensive article about Rachel's investigation and ultimate transformation, framing it as both a cautionary tale about the dangers of cult investigation and a mind-expanding exploration of consciousness possibilities. The article became one of the most widely read pieces in the Seattle Times' history and attracted attention from researchers around the world who were studying similar phenomena. The story of Rachel Morrison became a touchstone for discussions about the nature of consciousness, the possibility of dimensional transcendence, and the role of journalism in documenting experiences that challenge conventional reality. Dr. Chen's physics research team continued studying the observatory and similar locations throughout the Pacific Northwest, documenting evidence of naturally occurring dimensional interfaces that might explain not only Rachel's transformation, but also the long history of unusual phenomena reported in the region. The observatory itself became an unofficial pilgrimage site for consciousness researchers, spiritual seekers, and people who had lost loved ones to unexplained disappearances. Many visitors reported their own encounters with Rachel or other members of the transformed Eternal Dawn community, always described as helpful, peaceful beings who offered guidance and reassurance. David Reeves, the former community member whose testimony had been crucial to the investigation, eventually established a support group for families affected by dimensional disappearances. His organization helped people understand that their loved ones hadn't been lost, but had evolved into forms of existence that transcended conventional limitations. The truth about Rachel Morrison's disappearance was not that she had been murdered by cult members or had died in a wilderness accident. Instead, she had been chosen for a role that required transcending ordinary existence to become a dimensional journalist, documenting the intersection between different layers of reality and serving as proof that consciousness wasn't limited to single timelines or single bodies. Her camera, buried and preserved for 8 years before being discovered through psychic communication, contained evidence of her continuing work as an interdimensional correspondent. The photographs proved that Rachel had found her ultimate calling as a journalist who could report on the greatest story of all, the true nature of reality and consciousness. The case of Rachel Morrison demonstrated that some mysteries were too important to be solved in conventional ways, and that some people were destined for purposes that required evolving beyond ordinary human limitations. Her transformation from disappeared person to dimensional bridge showed that death itself might be just another assignment for those brave enough to accept it. Rachel's legacy continued as more people learned to recognize that certain disappearances weren't tragedies but graduations, and that the boundary between life and death, between presence and absence, was far more permeable than most people understood. Through her example, others found courage to explore the edges of reality and to accept that consciousness itself might be the ultimate frontier for journalistic investigation. The story of the Seattle journalist who disappeared while covering a cult became a modern legend about transcendence, transformation, and the ultimate evolution of human consciousness into something that could exist across all dimensions simultaneously, while continuing to serve the fundamental journalistic mission of witnessing, documenting, and sharing the truth about the nature of existence itself.